Good morning, guys. I loved working as a volunteer. I think volunteering is good and I think volunteering should be stopped in Melbourne. And if you think that doesn't make sense, just hear me out because I'm going to do everything I can to explain myself. But before I do, I wanted to make it clear that everything I'm about to say is my opinion. This video is for informational purposes. There is no harm intended, and I'm only criticizing the bad side of volunteering. I believe that one of the best ways to demonstrate the classism that exists in Melbourne is to look at the way volunteering works in this city. There are two main groups of volunteers in Melbourne. One is the bad privileged volunteer. Bad privileged volunteers are often dead weights, voyeurs, and parasites who suck information out of people and give nothing in return. Bad privileged volunteers may be wealthy or married to someone who has status in the community. Some bad privileged volunteers work in courts. The worst of them are voyeuristic parasites who sit in courtrooms listening to other people's sad stories to feed their own egos. If you ask them for help, they'll say no, and I'm only a volunteer is the catch all excuse they use not to help people. The bad privileged volunteers are often outspoken, self righteous, and boss other volunteers around. They get away with behaving like that because of their position in life, which is an example of how classist Melbourne society is. Bad privileged volunteers usually have their travel, accommodation, and meals paid for by the host employer. The other type of volunteer is the poor volunteer. They are generally living on welfare, looking for work, and volunteering with the hope that they will find employment. Poor volunteers are usually expected to pay for their own travel, meals, and accommodation, and most are not in a position to claim these expenses on tax. Poor volunteers generally work alongside paid employees at a workplace and get treated very badly. The paid employee tells the poor volunteer what to do, and it's often like the poor volunteer is the bitch dog of the paid employee. I don't believe most poor volunteers end up getting employed by their host employer, which makes the situation a scam. Volunteering in the hope of being employed but being rejected would have negative effects on the self esteem of the poor volunteer, which is an unnecessary negative social consequence of volunteering. There's always an inference that the poor volunteer should be grateful to be there. The unpaid labour of the poor volunteer is seen as less valuable than that of the privileged volunteer, which is classist. Everyone pretends that the poor volunteer might be hired, even though we all know they never will be. Poor volunteering is humouring the poorest and most disadvantaged people in Melbourne society. Having unpaid volunteers working alongside paid staff reinforces the classist belief that some people have entitlements and others don't. No one should have access to free labour, and labour should not be free. Volunteering enables the exploitation of poor people because there is no structure to ensure a poor volunteer will be given assistance to rise up to the level of the paid employee. The hopes and dreams of the poor volunteer are expected to be forgotten for the sake of the host business. I think the way volunteering works in Melbourne is outdated and needs to change to acknowledge the reality of the social and financial costs of volunteering. I believe all volunteers should receive an equal and minimum payment and an equal and minimum statement of service when they leave their volunteering position.